Before we start, I want to say that only 1% of you are subscribed. Please subscribe because at 1,000 subscribers, I will post a special video for you.
The Galactic Academy, a prestigious institution known for training elite soldiers, diplomats, and explorers, had a particular program that separated the truly exceptional from the rest. The Extreme Survival course was the most brutal and unforgiving of all. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about surviving in the most extreme and hostile environments imaginable. The Academy's instructors were battle-hardened veterans who had spent decades surviving on planets where even the most advanced species struggled. Only the toughest would survive. The students came from various alien races, each with their own specialized training and unique talents. Some species were accustomed to the cold, while others were experts in hot, arid conditions. The assignments ranged from planets with poisonous atmospheres to worlds where the very ground itself seemed to fight back against its inhabitants. The tests were rigorous, and many never made it through. The human students, however, were a new and somewhat baffling addition to the Academy. Known for their resilience and remarkable adaptability on their home planet, Earth, a place rife with predators, extreme weather, and constant danger, humans had been accepted into the program with a combination of skepticism and intrigue. Though Earth was considered a death world, where survival was a daily struggle, the idea of humans being trained alongside the galaxy's finest was seen as both risky and, for many, laughable. This particular year, however, things were different. The humans had made their way into the course, and as expected, they were given the most challenging assignment of all, to survive on a planet that had claimed the lives of many seasoned explorers before them. The class began with a briefing in the massive auditorium. The instructor, Kalen, a seasoned survival expert, stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding the attention of the students. His face was scarred from countless encounters with hostile environments, and his voice carried the weight of experience. "Welcome to Extreme Survival 101, Kalen began, his voice cold and authoritative. "You will be tested like never before. The planet you're about to face is unpredictable and dangerous. There will be storms, predators, hostile flora and fauna, and environmental conditions designed to kill you. Your mission is simple: survive for 1 week. Fail, and you will not leave." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Then, Kalen's eyes turned to the human students sitting in the back of the room, their expressions unreadable. "You will face challenges beyond your understanding," he continued. "Some of you may think you're ready, but only time will tell." John, one of the human students, exchanged a glance with Sarah, his fellow classmate. Both of them had trained for this day. Earth had prepared them for the harshest realities. From the wild animals they fought to survive, to the unpredictable climates they endured, their world was a constant battleground. They were ready. It was the rest of the class that had yet to learn the true meaning of survival. After the briefing, the class was led to the transport ships that would take them to the planet. As the students boarded the crafts, many species were donning their most advanced protective gear. The alien students, accustomed to high-tech equipment and detailed preparations, were anxious, checking their devices and double-checking their supplies. They were relying on technology, a crutch they knew well. But when the humans boarded, they didn't seem fazed. Some didn't bother with extra gear, while others wore the most basic of equipment. John simply grabbed his pack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked onto the craft with a calm confidence. He had been on worse planets. Sarah, ever the optimist, followed suit with a grin. The transport ships lifted off, heading toward the testing planet. The alien students looked at the humans, some with skepticism, others with curiosity. They had heard the stories about Earth's harshness. But could the humans really survive the brutal conditions of this planet, with all its threats? As the ships approached the planet's surface, the sky below them darkened. The storm clouds were already gathering, swirling ominously above a barren landscape. The winds were high, carrying with them dangerous sandstorms and atmospheric disturbances. Kalen's voice cut through the comms. "Prepare yourselves. This is where your test begins. You have 1 hour to land and start your survival tactics. Good luck." The humans exchanged one last glance, a silent understanding passing between them. The rest of the class was already looking at the planet, unsure of what would come next. But John and Sarah knew one thing for sure: surviving this was not going to be about technology or fancy tools. It would be about adaptation. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was adapting. The transport ship began its descent, heading into the heart of the storm. The students were about to face the hardest test of their lives. The transport ship jolted as it entered the planet's atmosphere, the turbulent winds buffeting the hull. The other students, many of them from technologically advanced species, braced themselves. Protective shields deployed around the craft, and the ship's AI system buzzed with warnings about the incoming storm. The planet below was a land of extremes: dust storms, high radiation, and constant seismic activity. The students had been briefed on the dangers, but now they were about to experience it firsthand. As the ship descended, John and Sarah exchanged a quick glance. This was their moment. They had trained for environments far more dangerous than this. They weren't intimidated by the storms. They'd fought through worse back home on Earth. "All right, people, stay sharp," Kalen's voice crackled through the comms, cutting across the rising chaos outside. "You're not just here to survive, you're here to show me what you're made of. Follow your instincts, and don't wait for your tech to do the work for you." The ship rocked once more, and with a final groan, it slammed down onto the cracked surface of the planet. Dust and debris flew up around the craft, but the humans were already unstrapping their harnesses. The alien students, many of whom relied heavily on their technology, were slower, fumbling with their equipment. Kalen's voice came again. "You have 30 minutes before the storm hits harder. Get moving." John grabbed his pack and jumped out of the ship first, his boots hitting the rocky ground with a soft thud. He didn't hesitate. The storm's gusts were strong, but he quickly assessed the landscape. The wind howled through the barren terrain, whipping sand and dust into the air, but John didn't flinch. Sarah followed right behind him, moving with the same fluidity and confidence. "Stay low and keep your head down," John said, scanning the horizon. "We need to find shelter before the storm fully hits." The rest of the class scrambled out, looking for cover and checking their equipment. The alien species, so used to relying on technology, looked confused for a moment. Some started to activate their environmental suits, while others deployed scanning devices to locate the nearest shelter. But the humans? They didn't waste time with gadgets. John immediately identified a small outcrop of rocks a few hundred meters away, a place where they could hunker down until the storm passed. Without a word, he and Sarah moved toward it, using their survival instincts to navigate the harsh conditions. "We'll need to make a fire once we get there," Sarah said, voice barely audible over the wind. "We can't survive without it in this cold." "Got it," John replied, his voice steady as they trudged through the sand. "We're going to need it to boil water too. This dust isn't good for drinking." The other students, meanwhile, were still caught up in their high-tech gear. Some alien species attempted to set up protective barriers, while others struggled to adjust their suits to filter out the dust. The humans, though, already had a fire going by the time the first half of the class made it to shelter. Within minutes, they had gathered kindling, using the surrounding dry plants and rocks to create a small, controlled fire. They melted some snow from a nearby ridge and filtered it through their makeshift strainer, drinking it as the storm continued to howl outside. "You two are insane," Kalen muttered under his breath, watching them from a distance. "How are you not freezing? Or dying from the dust?" John flashed him a grin. "Just used what we had." Kalen looked around at the other students, who were still fiddling with their gadgets and tech, struggling to stay warm. The humans were the only ones unaffected, surviving as if they'd been born for this. The first night. The storm continued through the night, but John and Sarah didn't waste any time. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the dense clouds, they'd set up a full camp. They had a fire, water, and food. The rest of the class, on the other hand, was struggling. Some were huddled together for warmth, while others were still trying to figure out their advanced filtration devices or trying to contact the ship for assistance. Kalen had to admit it, he was impressed. The humans didn't seem to care about the technology. They didn't need it. They were using their survival instincts to get by, and it was working. He had expected them to fail, expected them to crumble under the pressure of the planet's conditions. But instead, they were thriving. By the second day, Kalen had stopped questioning the humans. They had already started to build a small perimeter of traps around their camp to catch small game. Their group wasn't just surviving, they were adapting and thriving. Meanwhile, the rest of the class, despite all their advanced technology, were starting to show signs of fatigue and frustration. At one point, Kalen approached Sarah and John as they gathered firewood. "You've made this look too easy," he said, his voice sounding slightly defeated. "How are you two managing to do all of this without the gear the rest of the class is relying on?" Sarah smiled, looking up at him with a mix of amusement and humility. "We've lived in a place much worse than this. Earth is a death world," Kaylin. "We were born to survive. We fought off worse storms, survived far worse conditions. This." She waved a hand at the planet around them. "It's just a Tuesday." John chuckled, adding, "It's all about using your brain and knowing what's around you. Nature doesn't need fancy technology. It just needs someone who knows how to work with it." Kaylin stood still, absorbing her words. The humans weren't just surviving on instinct, they were actively outsmarting the environment, turning it into their advantage. Their lack of reliance on technology was precisely what was allowing them to succeed. They had honed survival techniques over centuries, learning how to make the most of the simplest things, and it was proving to be more effective than any gadget or weapon. By the third day, the planet's weather had become even more erratic, and the challenges were mounting. Temperatures had dropped drastically during the night, and the storm systems were growing stronger. The alien students, still relying on their high-tech gear, began to experience malfunctions. Devices designed to detect life forms and analyze the environment struggled to function in the harsh conditions. Many were left without reliable means of communication, while others were simply too overwhelmed by the planet's extremes to focus on anything but survival. But the humans? John and Sarah were thriving. They had already built several shelters, expertly crafted from the planet's sparse resources, and their fire had been going strong for hours. They had a stockpile of food, mostly scavenged from small creatures and plant life, and water, purified from the toxic streams running nearby. It was an approach that appeared simple, but in the increasingly hostile environment, it was proving to be far more effective than relying on complicated technology. John crouched next to the fire, stirring a pot of stew he had made from the game they had trapped earlier in the day. Sarah was gathering more wood, her eyes scanning the area for anything useful. Both of them had learned to move with precision, using their environment to its fullest potential. "You know," Sarah said as she set down a bundle of dry twigs by the fire, "we should be teaching the others how to do this. They're still stuck on their gadgets, trying to figure out what went wrong." John shrugged, not taking his eyes off the stew. "Some people just don't get it. You can't trust tech to do everything. You've got to think like the environment. Let it help you, not the other way around." As if on cue, a loud crash echoed from the distance. The Gravcar, the planet's most dangerous predators, had been circling for days, but today they seemed to be getting closer. John stood up, his expression serious. He scanned the surrounding terrain. The Gravcar had been watching them since they arrived, learning the patterns of the human camp, but they hadn't been able to get close. That was about to change. "We've got company," John muttered, his voice calm. "Get ready." Sarah's eyes widened, but she nodded quickly. Both of them had faced predators on Earth far worse than anything the planet could throw at them. They didn't need weapons or high-tech gear. They needed strategy. The Gravcar were fast, with thick clawed limbs that could tear through rock, and eyes that glowed with intelligence. They hunted in packs, using the terrain to their advantage. But John and Sarah weren't about to make it easy. The trap. John moved swiftly, laying out his plan with practiced precision. He had already identified weak spots in the terrain where they could use the environment to trap the Gravcar. Sarah, without hesitation, followed his lead. They had worked together before in similar situations, relying on their shared experience of survival on a deadly world. "I'll lead them into the trap," John said. "You get the barricade ready. Use the rocks and the branches for cover. They won't see it coming." Sarah nodded, immediately starting to gather large rocks and branches to form a makeshift wall. She was quick, setting up the area with a skill that came naturally after years of living in a world where such skills were the difference between life and death. The plan wasn't to confront the Gravcar head-on, it was to misdirect them, confuse them, and use their own aggression against them. The first Gravcar appeared on the horizon, its glowing eyes scanning the area. It was larger than the others, the pack leader, and it immediately noticed the human presence. With a sharp roar, it signaled to the others, who began charging toward the camp. Kaylin, who had been observing the humans from a distance, looked on with a mix of skepticism and concern. He could see the Gravcar closing in, their speed and power overwhelming. Surely the humans wouldn't be able to handle this. But then, John made his move. He sprinted toward the edge of the camp, drawing the predator's attention. He ducked behind a large rock and called out, mimicking the sounds of smaller prey. The Gravcar charged after him, their instincts kicking in. As they neared the trap, Sarah signaled. "Now," she shouted. John dove into a narrow gap between rocks just as the first of the Gravcar charged in, unaware of the hidden pit below. The ground beneath them gave way, and the massive creature fell into a pit made of sharpened stakes and branches. The rest of the pack hesitated for a moment, confused by the sudden change in their prey's behavior. But it was too late. The humans had already set the final part of the trap, a net made from branches and vines, camouflaged in the underbrush. As the rest of the grav car rushed forward, they triggered the trap, and the net sprang to life, ensnaring the rest of the pack. Kalen watched in stunned silence. He had been expecting a full-on confrontation, but the humans hadn't fought. They had outsmarted the predators, using nothing but the terrain and their instincts. The remaining grav car were quickly neutralized, either trapped or killed by their own momentum. John and Sarah stood over the fallen beasts, breathing heavily but undeterred. They had used their knowledge of the land and their environment, combined with quick thinking and teamwork, to subdue creatures that most species couldn't even approach. The realization. That night, as the humans sat around their fire, cooking the grav car meat for a meal, Kalen approached them, his expression unreadable. He had seen many survival tactics in his time, but this was something else. The humans had not just survived, they had dominated the environment with ease. "How did you do it?" Kalen asked, his voice filled with awe. "How did you trap those creatures so easily?" John wiped his hands on his pants and gave Kalen a casual smile. "Simple. We've dealt with things a lot worse than these things back home. You don't face something as dangerous as a grav car head-on. You use its own instincts against it." Sarah added, "On Earth, everything tries to kill you. The only way to survive is to be faster, smarter, and to use everything around you. This is nothing compared to the beasts back home." Kalen was silent for a long moment, looking at the humans. He had underestimated them. No, he had completely misjudged them. These weren't just survivors. They were predators in their own right. The humans had not just adapted to this planet, they had become a part of it, learning to read the environment and use it to their advantage. "I think I've made a mistake," Kalen admitted quietly. "I thought you were here to learn how to survive. But it seems you've already mastered that." John chuckled, turning back to the fire. "We're just getting started." The final day of the test had arrived. Kalen had watched the humans excel at every turn, but now the true test was about to begin, an all-out survival contest in the harshest part of the planet, where no technology could guarantee safety. The stakes were higher now, this was the last stretch, and the students had to prove they were truly capable of surviving the unrelenting forces of nature and the lethal wildlife. The plan was simple. The students were to be scattered across the most dangerous part of the planet, with no assistance and no technology allowed to help them. The terrain was volatile, unpredictable earthquakes, deadly predators, and the ever-present threat of toxic winds and radiation. The challenge wasn't just surviving the environment, it was about the ability to think on your feet when all seemed lost. As the students were dropped into their respective zones, the wind began to howl, and the sky grew darker. The air was thick with dust, and Kalen's voice echoed through the comms, reminding them of the dangers they would face. "Remember," Kalen's voice crackled, "the clock is ticking. You have 72 hours to reach the extraction point. You'll face everything this planet can throw at you. Those who make it, win. But those who can't, will learn valuable lessons. Keep your wits sharp." John and Sarah, once again, were unperturbed. As soon as the drop pods opened, they moved immediately, without hesitation. The others were still adjusting, some fighting the storm to get their bearings. But not the humans. They had already started strategizing, knowing that every second mattered. John looked to Sarah as they moved through the rocky terrain. "We'll need to find shelter fast. The predators in this area are aggressive, and the radiation zones aren't far." Sarah nodded, scanning the area. "There's an overhang up ahead, let's set up there and see what we can find. We can't waste time hunting yet. First, we need to stay alive." They worked with military precision, setting up a temporary shelter under the overhang, using large rocks and natural formations to protect themselves from the elements. The storm was intensifying, but they weren't fazed. They'd trained for moments like this. Meanwhile, the other students were scrambling. Some had tried to set up high-tech shelters, but quickly found themselves overwhelmed as the storm intensified. The winds blew through their equipment, causing screens to flicker and environmental shields to malfunction. Others were still trying to locate the necessary resources to make a fire or gather water, but their gadgets weren't providing the answers they needed. At one point, Kalen observed from a distance as a group of Bulgarian students, known for their strength and technological prowess, became trapped in a sinkhole caused by a sudden seismic tremor. Their shields had failed, and they had to rely on each other to escape, but the situation quickly escalated. Kalen's heart sank as he watched, but his eyes darted back to the humans. They weren't running into trouble. They were already scouting the area for food and water, moving quietly, methodically. How the hell are they doing this? Kalen muttered to himself. This is no different from Earth, is it? The ultimate challenge. By the second day, the students were nearing the extraction point, but the planet had other plans. The ground began to shake, and a deep rumbling filled the air as a massive tremor rattled the entire area. The sky darkened even more, and strange creatures, drawn by the vibrations, began to emerge from the Earth's cracks. The alien students, accustomed to relying on their technology, were caught off guard. Their sensors failed to detect the creatures until it was too late. The Gravcar, the same predators they had fought in earlier tests, emerged from the shadows, far more aggressive than before. Some students managed to defend themselves using energy weapons, but others weren't so lucky. The Gravcar attacked with brutal efficiency, and even the most experienced of the alien species were caught by surprise. Some were injured, while others were forced to retreat to higher ground. But not the humans. John and Sarah had already prepared for this. When the tremors began, they knew what was coming. They quickly dug a shallow pit and set up tripwires around their shelter, using branches, vines, and even rocks to make simple traps. As the Gravcar approached, they triggered the traps. The creatures were drawn into the chaos of their own instincts, and instead of a head-on battle, the humans used the creatures' aggression to their advantage. They had already anticipated this, had planned for it. Kalen watched in awe as the humans neutralized the creatures one by one, using only basic tools and tactics. Their calm demeanor and tactical thinking were a far cry from the panic that had taken over the alien students. It was as if they were born to survive in a world like this. The aftermath. By the third day, it was clear who would be successful in this test. As the final group of students arrived at the extraction point, Kalen looked over the results. The humans had not only survived, they had outsmarted the planet, using everything they had at their disposal. They didn't rely on high-tech gear, didn't need advanced weapons. They used what was available to them, their minds, their instincts, and the environment around them. Kalen stood at the extraction point as the other students arrived, looking tired, wounded, and defeated. He turned to the humans, who had arrived hours earlier, sitting quietly by a fire they had made with basic materials. "Well done," Kalen said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "You've passed. You're the first group to reach the extraction point. You've shown us what survival really means." John smiled, his exhaustion evident but his confidence unwavering. "Like I said, it's about adapting to what the planet throws at you. It's not about technology or fancy weapons. It's about using what you've got," Sarah added, "and knowing when to think ahead, when to act, and when to use your surroundings. Everything here is trying to kill us. The difference is knowing how to make it work for you." Kalen nodded, finally understanding. The humans hadn't just survived, they had thrived. They had turned the planet's dangers into tools for their own survival, and in doing so, they had proven that the true key to survival wasn't advanced technology or brute strength. It was adaptability, creativity, and the will to never give up. As the rest of the class finally made their way to the extraction point, Kalen couldn't help but feel a deep respect for the human students. The future of survival in the galaxy, he now realized, might not lie in the advanced technology of other species. It might just lie in the raw, untamed survival instincts of the humans.